So you're trying to decide whether you want to get a cinema camera or a mirrorless camera, or DSLR for that fact, in order to create your amazing cinematic videos. What are the differences? Why are the cost differences so despairing? And which one should you get and is better for you? Let's talk about it in this video. If you're new to my channel, I like to talk about mirrorless cameras or DSLR cameras specifically for video, with occasional reference to cinema cameras. So if you like that type of stuff, definitely consider subscribing. I give tips and tricks as well, and today's video is about that. So why would somebody buy a cinema camera over a mirrorless camera? I mean, a lot of people, especially YouTubers, love using a mirrorless body for all of the features that it has that does movie-like quality video in such a comfortable form. A lot of people find comfort in using a DSLR mirrorless camera. So why get a cinema camera that predominantly only does video? What are the differences? Okay, enough with the questions. Let's start by giving you guys some answers. One of the main differences is what I just mentioned. This camera does both. It takes great pictures and it does great video. For example, I'm using the R5, which is a pretty cool camera that came out in 2020, 8K video. And this is the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K, which I've got kind of rigged up here, though I don't have my SSD hooked up to it. It's still a pretty cool cinema camera that's very affordable. In fact, this was less expensive than this, which to me makes sense because this does a lot less when it comes to features than this does. And that's going to be the case for many cinema cameras, including the more expensive ones. So let's go over what you usually get predominantly with most hybrid cameras, meaning DSLR mirrorless cameras that also shoot video. Many of them include features, especially the newer ones, maybe not the older ones, but I'm going to talk mostly, if you bought one within the past couple of years, you'll more than likely have this. You'll get features such as 4K recording, maybe 1080p recording at whatever the sensor size is. Some of them have smaller sensor sizes, some of them have bigger sensor sizes, but the bigger, like full frame cameras, will be able to give you really shallow depth of field because of the larger size of their sensor. Many of them have flip screens, some have just like tilt screens, but that's a benefit that you'll usually get with these. Also, what you get is the ability to shoot high resolution pictures. And with that comes a number of custom modes that you can, of course, dial in when it comes to shutter speed, frame rate, whatnot. So that part is cool. A number of mirrorless or DSLR cameras also will work with SD cards, where not every cinema camera will be able to work with SD cards. Sure, my Blackmagic does, but many of them will need a faster card. So that's an advantage that you could get with these type of mirrorless bodies. Also the form factor, the smaller, more discrete form factor is something that you get with DSLR or mirrorless cameras. So you can go to a place that's pretty concerned about recording video or whatnot, but you have a camera and be like, no, I'm just taking pictures. And you could just look through the viewfinder and be recording video. So it's a lot more discreet, where some cameras, such as even the Blackmagic, it's a little wider, and if I rig it up to like put a monitor on top and rig it out more extensively, then it could be a bit more concerning, and people might say, hey, you're not allowed to film here. So that's an advantage that you get with the mirrorless camera. A lot of modern DSLR mirrorless cameras include something called in-body image stabilization. Now that's when the sensor can actually shift. The R5 has it as well. But the sensor could shift so that when you're actually recording video and you don't have a gimbal, you could at least get some steady shots. A lot of these cameras, at least the newer ones, have incredible autofocus features. From Panasonic's not so respected but still functional autofocus, depth by defocus, to Canon's exceptional dual pixel autofocus on a lot of their recent bodies that really can focus in on you and make sure that whatever your subject is always in focus. So it makes it easy. And because of the combination of flip screen, in-body image stabilization, incredible autofocus, nice handling in the body, you can do vlogging. You can set the camera up to look at you and do vlogging like this pretty easily. I've got an 11mm lens hooked up so I get a nice wide shot, selfie vlog, and then I could turn around and work like that. So it's very easy to use from that perspective as a run and gun type of situation, with all those settings and features just working for you automatically. But the downside to these type of cameras that you've got to understand from a production standpoint is that the actual codec or the type of files that it writes to for movies tends to be compressed, pre-processed, and harder to edit with. A lot of them will actually, at least the newer ones, are really trying to add additional color information, going from 8-bit color to like 10-bit color, 422 instead of 420, higher bit rate, but the compression type is still something that's not friendly to edit with in many cases. You'll still have to like transcode the footage to make it easily editable, like ProRes, for example, and then tweak it from there, which makes that a bit of an inconvenience when you have these type of cameras. The R5 in particular also records RAW, which is something that normally only a cinema camera would allow, but a lot of cameras that have been coming out either allow for an output of RAW, like ProRes RAW, or in Canon's case, they actually do internal RAW. But those file sizes are huge, and again, even though they're great, they're not easy to work with. So from a workload standpoint, they tend to be a little bit more difficult to edit with, either because the compression types make it difficult to like work with like color correction or whatnot, or the file types themselves are just hard to edit with, even though they might have additional color information that you desire. And one of the final downsides is that the dynamic range, which is the differences between the brightest part of your image and the darkest part of your image, and how much in each extreme your camera can capture. The DSLR and mirrorless cameras tend to be a bit more limited when it comes to that. Granted, Sony brags about 15 stops of dynamic range, and a stop is pretty much the amount of light an object has, and then it just doubles, and each time the amount of light doubles, that's considered a stop. Sony's tend to brag about 15 stops, but has it been proven? I don't think they've really come close. They've been pretty good, but I think it's been about 12 to 13 if you really actually look at how many stops that they've been able to accomplish. This gets an amazing 12 stops, according to the manufacturer would put out, but its actual performance may vary. It's close to like 11.5 stops, if I'm not mistaken. So those are the features from a DSLR mirrorless camera. Now let's talk about the differences in cinema camera and why cinema cameras include or exclude certain features that you would get on a mirrorless camera, and then what makes them so expensive. So a cinema camera like the Blackmagic, in this case, it's actually a lot less expensive, almost 3 times less expensive than the R5 was. So right now this retails at $1,295, close to $1,300, and comes with editing software. But there are a lot of trade-offs. I'm going to speak in generalities about most cinema cameras and how they function. Now, one of the most glaring differences in cinema cameras is the fact that they're not designed for photos. So you notice that their sensors do not have as high resolution as those that you would get from their mirrorless counterparts when it comes to cameras. So the R5, for example, has a 45 megapixel sensor. This camera, it's a little bit over 8 megapixel sensor because it only does 4K, and that's all it really needs. The R5 does record 8K, and for 8K you totally need that high resolution, about 35 megapixel resolution if it was like a 17:9 cutout. But of course the full frame sensor is a little more squarish than a 17:9 cutout. Because you have a lower resolution sensor, you get great quality video. But there's another thing about cinema sensors that is very particular when it comes to cinema world. Now, cinema cameras are meant and designed so that it's customizable for your shoot. They want it to be as flexible as you need it for whatever type of shoot that you're going to do. So in many cases, you'll see a cinema camera just be like a box and that's it. And then you just kind of rig it up with particular lenses that you want to rig up to it. It'll have attachments for batteries, different attachments for screens that you can do. And in this case, Blackmagic, for such a cheap price, actually designed a camera that already has a screen pre-built in. where in many cases, such as if you buy a Red, you have to buy the monitor separately, which would be another $1,000. It has a battery port, where in some you actually have to buy an attachment for a battery port. But it's never really expected to have a long battery life to begin with. The fact that this has a battery port, but you get power adapter options on the side, either USB-C or its own little power adapter, means that you can either use what they give you or rig it up yourself. So having that option for such a cheap price, I think is great. Even though people have complained about the battery life, if you buy a cinema camera, especially an expensive one, you're not even getting a battery or a battery pack, let alone longer battery life. And because this has an option for a grip, you get even longer battery life should you want to buy a grip for it. So there's so many options for this camera, but many cameras as well that are cinema have different options for different batteries, and that's the point. So another point to mention is cinema cameras tend to want to have like options to help make your image quality better and your audio better. So they're going to have, for example, more audio ports than your regular DSLR or mirrorless camera. And the Blackmagic is no exception. It not only includes the 3.5 millimeter audio jacks that most mirrorless and DSLR cameras have, but it also includes a mini XLR port. And what you'll find in many cinema cameras is you might have to buy the attachment, but they come with XLR ports. Some mirrorless cameras also include that option as well to have XLR ports, but of course it's not the standard. But when it comes to cinema cameras, it's usually pretty standard that at least you'll have an XLR port option. So what XLR does is actually gives you more crisp and better audio so that it's less prone to interference, and you'll get just that better, crisper quality audio that you want. Believe it or not, because of my audio problems in this room, I'm recording to an external recorder through the XLR port to try to minimize exterior noise interference that I would normally get. Just so you know, audio is like, you're halfway there if you get your audio right when you're making a video. Cinema cameras also do something else to the sensor, which is what I wanted to mention. Cinema cameras will purposely omit in-body image stabilization. Even if the manufacturer knows how to do it, they will omit IBIS because of the risk that IBIS causes when you're actually filming. When you're filming, especially things that are high action or quick pans or whatnot, you might say, well, I just turned off the IBIS, so I can have those quick pans too without the IBIS getting in the way. Well, the problem is that your sensor still has the ability to kind of like shake in that little zone, which can actually damage your sensor. Even though it should be locked in, you don't want any risk when it comes to sensor. You want the sensor to be locked in tight when you're filming those fast-moving scenes. I believe all cinema cameras have locked sensors so that they don't have any of that stabilization. And though it may be a negative to a lot of people's like, I don't have IBIS, it's a good thing. You want to be able to actually take your camera everywhere, move it as fast as possible without risking your sensor and damaging your sensor. So that's a point. Another plus of the Blackmagic, which is not in every camera body, and I definitely want to mention a second time, is the fact that this has a screen. And the fact that it's got a screen on the body is something that's uncommon and unusual for a cinema camera, because most cinema cameras would actually expect that you mount or rig a different monitor to be able to see it. And some actually do have monitors attached, but they'd be a lot smaller. But depending on what you buy, you're not always expecting to get a screen. So to have one at all is, for such an inexpensive price, that's 5 inches and touchscreen, is amazing. And finally, one of the other caveats, and it may be a downside for many cinema cameras, is the lack of good autofocus. Now, many lineups such as Sony and Canon are starting to use autofocus in their cinema lines because they have amazing autofocus, and it's actually starting to have a purpose when it comes to certain filming situations. But for a lot of expensive cameras like the Arri Alexa or the Red series of cinema cameras, they don't have autofocus. Blackmagic does, but it's a contrasted tech autofocus that's not continuous, and it's like one and done. And that's with its purpose too, because you just want to make sure your subject is in focus. You're pretty much in control manually from there. And that's pretty common in the industry because when you're creating an expensive film, you more than likely want to have full control of focus, and you might have a focus puller that's only job is to do the actual focus adjustments. So from that perspective, it makes sense, and that's why they have it that way. I mean, you might have been able to vlog with this camera, and it doesn't look that big, but it's still meant to be a cinema camera. Though what's handy about this camera is that you could just hit a button on the back and autofocus on you while you look at yourself and vlog. But without in-body image stabilization or a flip screen, it almost seems impractical. But thank goodness you can rig it up. And if you want to vlog with this and have stabilization, put it on a gimbal, put a monitor on top, or have a monitor attached to the gimbal on the side. That makes more sense. And then you could see yourself and vlog at the same time. Granted, that's a lot more overblown than a DSLR or mirrorless camera with a flip out screen and in-body image stabilization. Then this is a lot easier and a lot more practical. But it's not an impossibility. And really, a cinema camera's purpose isn't really vlogging. It's to create a cinematic experience, and that's what we're all looking for. Which one should you get? Well, if you're into creating movies and you have that mindset of filming to tell stories, I would definitely recommend getting a cinema camera. Now, you'll see that price differences are various when it comes to cinema cameras. Like you see here, this Blackmagic is inexpensive at $12.95, but a lot less expensive than some of the high-end mirrorless or DSLR cameras. Of course, you will not find the cinema camera as cheap or as inexpensive as many DSLR cameras or mirrorless cameras that are within the less than $1,000 range. So if you want to film something, really the first thing you consider is your budget. But if you have the budget for something a bit more expensive and you're into creating films, I would recommend a cinema camera. I do believe the more you pay, the more it's going to cost you. That in particular is why I chose the Blackmagic. And one last thing that I did want to mention is that many cinema cameras, not all, record RAW internally. And RAW recording lets you adjust white balance and exposure levels in post, which is crucial when it costs a lot of money to film everything that you've got to film that day, and you want to change the look or change the colors. You have so much flexibility in post when it comes to filming RAW. And that's something that most DSLR mirrorless cameras are only just now getting into, and it's not always practical to record RAW with those cameras. That's the difference. Now, if you want to take pictures and take great video, then stick with DSLR and mirrorless hybrid cameras. But if you're really into creating next level stories with true good looking footage, then I can't recommend anything less than getting yourself a cinema camera. And because the price ranges have dropped a lot for those type of cameras, they're starting to become affordable. So it's an exciting time to own cameras, and it's an exciting time to be in the camera world. So let me know what your thoughts. I ranted on there for a little bit, but it's a lot to say, right? Hope I helped. If I did help, consider hitting that subscribe button. And as always, when you do, you'll make my day when you subscribe today. This is Magnus, and I'm out. See you guys later.